The tribal chief is back, and he's not here to talk, he is back to take what rightfully belongs to him, and that is his glory. For months, Seth Rollins thought he had WWE on lock. Titles, allies, influence. But while Seth built his faction in the spotlight, Roman Reigns rebuilt in the shadows. And last night? He walked out of the dark, with the Usos behind him. This isn't the old bloodline. This is war. Roman said one thing backstage: let's take back everything. It wasn't just about power. It was about pride. About proving that no matter who rises, the head of the table still decides who eats. And here's the shocker: Roman didn't wait. He ordered the first strike. Smackdown ended in chaos, and Seth? Now he's the one cornered. Hit that follow, because this isn't a feud. This is a tribal reckoning. What if I told you that the most dangerous man in WWE wasn't the one holding the titles, but the one watching in silence? Last night on Smackdown, under the roar of a crowd and behind the glitz of the spotlight, something ancient stirred. Not a character. Not a gimmick. A force. A legacy. A reckoning. The tribal chief returned. No music. No warning. Just Roman Reigns stepping out of the shadows like a goddamn storm. He wasn't alone. The Usos flanked him, not like tag team brothers, but like soldiers. No smiles. No celebration. Just one sentence behind the curtain: let's take back everything. No wasted words. No hollow catchphrases. No merch plugs. Just raw intent. You see, while Seth Rollins was parading in the spotlight, dripping in gold, flanked by his new faction, puffed up by Paul Heyman's silver tongue, Roman Reigns was rebuilding in the dark. No cameras. No interviews. Just silence, and planning. This isn't a comeback story. This is an ambush. And when it hit hard. Smackdown didn't end, it detonated. Security scattered. Officials were flattened. Rollins was left staring down the barrel of something he didn't anticipate: the full, unrelenting wrath of a man who believes the throne was stolen. Roman didn't return to play the game. He came back to flip the board and burn it. Let's rewind. For months, the WWE Universe has been watching Seth Rollins rise, swagger, sparkle, and all. He's held gold. Built a crew. Captivated the audience. Called himself the visionary, the revolution. With Heyman whispering in his ear again, he's rebuilt himself into something more dangerous than ever before: a calculating champion with an army and a plan. On the surface? Power. But underneath? Arrogance. While Seth put his faith in the future, Roman leaned into something ancient: blood. Not marketing. Not alliances of convenience. Not contracts. Blood. The Usos weren't just recruited, they were reawakened. Years of history. Loyalty bruised, yes. But not broken. Because you don't erase heritage with hashtags. You don't replace dominance with microphones. Seth has gold. Roman has law. And in tribal law, the head of the table decides who eats. So when Roman said, let's take back everything, he wasn't talking about titles. He meant control. Respect. Fear. That primal understanding that when his music hits, everyone stops breathing for a second. And here's the real problem for Rollins: Roman didn't come back asking for matches. He came back taking territory. Smackdown ended not with a finish, but with an invasion. Not a run-in. Not a surprise return. A declaration. Backstage segments got hijacked. The camera scrambled. Production tried to cut away, but fans saw enough. Roman isn't asking for attention. He's demanding obedience. He stared dead into the camera, the Usos beside him, and dropped a single line that felt less like a promo and more like a warning: they forgot who I am. Time to remind them. This isn't the Bloodline 1.0. This is something meaner. Sharper. Less about legacy, more about vengeance. Because this time, Roman's not defending anything. He's hunting. And Seth? For all his charisma, for all his cleverness, he never saw this coming. He spent too long looking up at spotlights and not enough time checking the shadows. Now the shadows are here. And they're carrying war paint. So here's what you're about to witness in this video. How Roman Reigns rebuilt in silence while the WWE Universe moved on. The inside story of how the Usos came back into the fold. Paul Heyman's betrayal, or master plan. The chaos that unfolded on Smackdown, and why it's only the beginning. What this means for the WWE landscape, from championship scenes to locker room alliances. And what happens when the throne isn't taken, but retaken. Because this isn't about titles anymore. This is about power. And Roman didn't come back to talk. He came back to rule. For nearly 3 years, Roman Reigns stood untouchable. Not just as the Universal Champion, not just as the Tribal Chief, but as the most dominant figure WWE had seen in over a decade. He didn't just hold the title, he redefined what it meant to hold it. Every time he walked into an arena, it felt like gravity shifted. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They reacted like they were witnessing something inevitable. But even the strongest empires fall. And Roman's didn't collapse in one night. It bled out slowly. It started with trust. The bloodline was more than a faction, it was a family enterprise. Built on loyalty. Fueled by fear. Protected by dominance. At its peak, it was a machine. Roman at the top. The Usos running interference. Solo Sikoa waiting in the shadows like a loaded weapon. And Paul Heyman whispering strategies like a consigliere behind a throne. Every week, the pattern was the same. Roman stood in the center of the ring while his cousins flanked him, belts over shoulders, heads bowed. They weren't equals. They were soldiers. Enforcers. Roman wasn't a teammate. He was a sovereign. But here's the thing about ruling through fear, eventually, people get tired of kneeling. Jimmy was the first to crack. You could see it long before it exploded. The resentment in his eyes. The hesitation before carrying out Roman's orders. The way he looked at his brother Jay. Not with partnership, but desperation. Like he was trying to pull him out of quicksand. But Jay. He was too deep in. Too loyal. Too broken. Then came the betrayal. Jimmy superkicked Roman. The crowd erupted. Shock, electricity, catharsis. For months, Roman had choked the locker room with intimidation. In that moment, someone, family, stood up to him. But retaliation came swift. Roman retaliated like a wounded king. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He isolated. Cut off. Used Solo as a new blade. The message was clear, betray me, and you're erased. But betrayal is a virus. It spreads. Jay tried to stay loyal. He tried to believe that Roman was still the leader he once revered. But loyalty turned into torment. Week after week, Roman tested him. Ordered him to beat down Jimmy. Used Solo to discipline him. Turned love into control. The emotional tipping point came when Roman forced Jay to choose between his brother and his king. That's when the cracks weren't just visible. They were irreversible. Jay superkicked Roman, too. For a brief, electric second, it felt like justice had arrived. The bloodline was fractured. Solo remained silent. Cold. Obedient. But there were hints. Tiny moments. A pause here. A look there. Seeds of doubt. Even Paul Heyman, usually poised and smug, started to fumble. The machine was breaking. Not from the outside. From within. By the time Roman finally vanished from weekly programming, the bloodline had stopped being a force and started becoming a question mark. What happens when power is built on fear, and the fear disappears? The answer came in silence. Roman didn't show up. No injury angle. No dramatic farewell. He just stopped appearing. Left the chaos behind like a tyrant who abandoned the burning castle. The world moved on. But Roman wasn't done. He was watching. The world didn't know it, but he had already started rewriting the plan. Because here's the part nobody talks about, Roman doesn't react. He recalibrates. Every loss, every betrayal, every blow to his ego wasn't failure. It was data. It was fuel. He wasn't sitting out. He was plotting a return where he wouldn't just reclaim his place. He would erase everyone who stood in his way. But in the weeks that followed his disappearance, the narrative wasn't about Roman. It was about what he left behind. The Usos split. Jimmy tried to justify his betrayal, but his words rang hollow. Jay left WWE entirely for a time, quitting in storyline. Solo became more brutal. More robotic. Paul Heyman? He started hedging his bets. And that's when Seth Rollins stepped into the spotlight. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't announced. But the void Roman left behind was too big not to fill. Seth had always been a performer, flashy, dramatic, unpredictable. But suddenly, he became something else, consistent. He showed up every week. Defended his title. Delivered promos that weren't just entertainment, they were doctrine. He became a flag bearer for a new WWE, one without a dictator. The audience didn't just cheer him. They needed him. But Roman watched. He saw the fans turn. Saw the analysts talk about the Rollins era. Saw Paul Heyman slowly drift toward the new center of gravity. Roman wasn't angry. He was remembering. Remembering what it felt like when nobody questioned him. When the locker room bowed without needing to be told. When Paul Heyman didn't just serve him, he feared him. Roman wasn't jealous of Seth. He was insulted. Because in Roman's world, there is no such thing as equal. And that's the part people forgot. They thought Roman's fall was the end of a reign. But in his mind? It was just intermission. The Usos' betrayal? That was weakness that needed correction. Solo's obedience? A test. Paul's disloyalty? Expected. Because Roman wasn't here to rule a family anymore. He was coming back to rule everything. And he would do it without mercy. The fall of the bloodline wasn't a tragedy. It was a transformation. Roman didn't mourn it. He dissected it. He studied every moment of weakness, every lapse of loyalty, every sign of erosion. And when he disappeared from TV, it wasn't retreat. It was hibernation. Because predators don't roar before they strike. They wait. And then they pounce. Now, Roman is back. Not with apologies. Not with explanations. With fire. With fury. With unfinished business and a score to settle. He didn't just return to reunite the bloodline. He returned to weaponize it. Seth Rollins, Paul Heyman, the entire WWE universe, they thought they witnessed the fall of an empire. But Roman Reigns isn't rebuilding an empire. He's building an army. And this time, he's not protecting a throne. He's burning every other one to the ground. While Roman Reigns retreated into silence, Seth Rollins became noise. Big, loud, technicolor noise. Every entrance. Every laugh. Every jacket. Every sermon from his self-made pulpit. And it worked. The moment Roman disappeared, the eyes of the WWE universe needed a new center. Not a placeholder. Not a temporary champion. A true leader. A spectacle. A storm. And that storm had a name, Seth freakin' Rollins. But this wasn't the same Seth who burned it down in NXT. It wasn't the Shield's cold-blooded assassin. It wasn't even the egotistical Monday Night Messiah who once tried to save the company from itself. No, this Seth was something more dangerous. This Seth had clarity. He wasn't playing a character. He became one. Every strut, every cackle, every cryptic promo was a calculated maneuver. He didn't just carry the WWE World Heavyweight title. He weaponized it. While others chased belts, Seth made his championship into a symbol of work rate, consistency, showmanship, and supremacy. But even more than the gold, he knew the power of presence. Roman used fear. Seth used rhythm. Roman commanded silence. Seth commanded chaos. And in Roman's absence, Seth didn't waste a second. He built. Not a stable. A movement. It started quietly. A promo here. A handshake there. Then it escalated. Superstars who felt overlooked, who wanted revenge against the bloodline or just a shot at something real, found themselves orbiting Seth. They didn't join him. He didn't beg. He made it seem like their idea. That's what made him different. Roman demanded loyalty. Seth seduced it. He saw opportunity in Roman's fractured empire. Broken pieces scattered everywhere. Solo, detached. The Usos, directionless. Heyman, visibly nervous. Seth didn't have to recruit. He had to exist. The first major shift came when Seth aligned, publicly, with Paul Heyman. On the surface, it looked like Heyman simply drifted toward the new power. But beneath the surface, it was layered. Seth had history with Paul. Not always friendly. Not always clean. But real. Seth knew Heyman's value. Not just as a mouthpiece. As a strategist. As someone who knew every backstage creak in WWE structure. Heyman had once managed Roman's terror campaign. Now, he whispered in Seth's ear. The WWE universe buzzed. Was this betrayal? Was this survival? Did Heyman truly believe in Seth's leadership? Or was he playing both sides, waiting for Roman to return and reclaim him? Seth didn't seem to care. He had the show. Every Monday night, the World Heavyweight Champion didn't just show up. He owned the camera. His entrances became rituals. He preached in riddles. Promised chaos. And when the bell rang, he delivered, every time. Match of the night. Match of the year. It didn't matter. Seth Rollins was putting in the work Roman never had to. He wasn't just a character anymore. He was the industry. But with success comes threat. And Seth knew something the others didn't: popularity is temporary. Legacy is war. He didn't just want to be a great champion. He wanted to architect the future. So he started planting seeds. A new generation of allies. Superstars hungry, fast, unchained. Some were underdogs, others were killers. But they all shared one trait: ambition. Not for the spotlight, but for control. People started calling it Rollins faction. That was too small. It wasn't a stable. It wasn't a team. It was an infrastructure. Raw segments started being dominated by this unit. Tag matches. Interference angles. Promos that blurred fiction and reality. They weren't just disrupting feuds, they were reshaping the show's ecosystem. The idea was simple: if they could control what happened inside the ring, they'd soon control what happened outside of it. Roman had ruled through dominance. Seth ruled through momentum. And the fans? They ate it up. The arena sang his theme like gospel. The kids wore his sunglasses. The adults screamed his chants. Even critics who once dismissed him as style over substance now called him the heart of WWE. But that's where Seth made his first mistake. He believed his own myth. Because while he was ascending, stealing headlines, ruling social media, building alliances, captivating millions, he forgot something essential. You don't become a king because people love you. You become a king because no one can stop you. And Seth hadn't been tested. Not really. Sure, he had defended his title against killers. Carried workhorse matches. Put his body on the line weekly. But he hadn't been hunted. Roman hunted. And while Seth laughed under the lights, Roman watched from the dark. Paul Heyman knew. He smiled with Seth. Plotted with Seth. But deep down, he felt it. The tremor in the distance. Roman wasn't gone. He was circling. Gathering. Changing. And when he returned, he wouldn't be looking for titles. He'd be looking for heads. But Seth had convinced himself otherwise. That Roman had moved on. That his time was over. That the future was here, and it wore sequins and sang its own theme song. But history doesn't forget kings. Especially not ones who were never dethroned. In Roman's mind, Seth wasn't the new king. He was a usurper. And Paul Heyman? He was just another apostate who needed to be punished. But Seth didn't know. Not yet. So he smiled. Built. Trusted. Talked legacy. And every week, his influence grew. He turned Raw into a cathedral. But the storm didn't come on Monday night. It came on Smackdown. The show Seth didn't control. The show where the silence had grown louder than any chant. That's where the earth shook. And when Roman stepped through the curtain, not with fireworks but with purpose, Seth wasn't ready. He was cornered. Unaware. Exposed. Because while he had built a faction, Roman had prepared a reckoning. Disappearance isn't defeat. In the world of professional wrestling, absence usually means recovery. An injury. A contract renegotiation. Maybe burnout. When a superstar vanishes without storyline closure, the assumption is always the same: they're done for now. But Roman Reigns never operates within assumptions. He doesn't react like other men. He doesn't vanish like other stars. He retreats like a general. He regroups like a warlord. And when the bloodline crumbled in public view, when the Usos turned, when Solo began acting without permission, when Paul Heyman stopped speaking with conviction, Roman didn't respond on Twitter. He didn't cut a promo. He watched. And then he disappeared. No goodbye. No final confrontation. No official removal of titles. Just nothing. The fans debated. Was he hurt? Was WWE writing him off to protect his legacy? Had the era ended? The locker room breathed easier. Some dared to talk louder in production meetings. A few took more risks in the ring. With Roman gone, there was a perceived power vacuum. But Roman didn't leave the company. He left the stage. Behind the curtain, Roman Reigns was more active than ever. If you talk to certain insiders, quietly, privately, they'll tell you about the ghost schedule. Hotel bookings under aliases. Closed-door meetings with former allies. Gym sessions where no phones were allowed. Rumors of him flying into performance centers under the cover of night. No media. No vlogs. No fan sightings. Just shadows. And in those shadows, he built something far more dangerous than a storyline. He built a philosophy. To understand Roman's mindset during this blackout period, you have to understand the way he sees the business. Roman doesn't consider himself a performer. Not like Seth. Not like Cody. He sees himself as the centerpiece. The axis around which everything else turns. That's not arrogance. It's calculation. In his absence, he expected things to fall apart. But they didn't. Seth rose. Heyman migrated. The Usos found cameras again. And that's what burned. Roman wasn't angry at their betrayal. He expected that. Loyalty fades when the checks still come in and the fans still cheer. What Roman couldn't accept, what became intolerable, was the ease with which the world moved on. His silence was supposed to sting. Instead, it gave rise to false kings. So, he didn't plan a return. He planned a campaign. He started with isolation. Roman cut ties with everyone. Even Solo Sikoa, who remained technically loyal, was given no access. Paul Heyman was ghosted. WWE officials stopped getting responses. No one, not even family, could get through. This wasn't a man licking his wounds. This was a predator waiting until the wind shifted in his favor. For weeks, maybe months, Roman disappeared from every known narrative. But quietly, under that public void, something else happened. A shift in energy. A tightening of purpose. Sources say he returned to the ring, privately. Trained with military precision. Sparred with shooters. Not for cardio. For control. Wrestling wasn't the point anymore. Dominance was. He rewatched footage, not just of Seth's matches, but his promos, his interactions with Heyman, his interviews on late-night talk shows. Every smug look. Every dig about being the face of the company now. Every hint that Roman's time was up. He took notes. He kept score. And more than that, he studied the politics of the locker room. He wanted to know who spoke Roman's name in his absence. Who praised Seth too quickly. Who wanted the seat at the head of the table. And when he had enough data, he started making quiet contact. Not with agents. Not with producers. With blood. The Usos didn't find their way back to Roman. Roman found his way back to them. The exact conversation remains undocumented. No camera crew caught it. No audio leaked. But something shifted. Jimmy and Jay started acting different. Their interviews grew shorter. Their tone sharpened. There was less laughing. Less show. More business. They stopped taking sides on public social media. Then came the clue that gave it away. The Usos missed an advertised media appearance in Los Angeles. No explanation. No statement. Insiders confirmed they were in Florida that night. So was Roman. Something happened there. Some sort of pact. Some kind of vow. Not for the bloodline as it used to be. Not for family. For vengeance. If Roman had returned quietly and tried to put the old gang back together, this would be a nostalgia story. But nostalgia isn't in Roman's DNA. He wasn't rebuilding the bloodline. He was weaponizing it. In this secret war camp, where the gym doubled as a strategy board, where loyalty was interrogated before it was trusted, Roman developed a plan that had nothing to do with titles. It had to do with order. Seth's faction, Paul switch, the fans' new chance, none of it would be met with confrontation. It would be met with eradication. And here's the part that makes this version of Roman more dangerous than ever: he doesn't want to be liked. He doesn't even need to be feared anymore. He wants to be undeniable. Before, Roman used silence as power. Now, he uses silence as punishment. Every week he wasn't on TV? That was calculated. Every match he didn't run in on? Measured. He waited until the WWE Universe forgot how it felt to brace themselves when his music hit. And when they did? He hit. No music. No lights. No production cue. Just Roman, walking through smoke, eyes locked, mouth sealed, blood behind him. Not returning. Advancing. Because while Seth was busy building a brand, Roman was crafting an execution. Family doesn't break easily. But when it does, the pieces don't just fall, they cut. The Usos were never just tag team champions. They weren't just Roman's cousins or enforcers in the bloodline. For nearly a decade, they were the beating heart of WWE's tag division. Agile, vicious, connected. They moved like mirrors. thought in tandem, delivered super kicks like punctuation marks. And when Roman rose as tribal chief, they stood beside him, not behind him, giving legitimacy to his crown. But that unity came at a cost. Roman's rule wasn't collaboration. It was command. He didn't ask the Usos to follow. He demanded they acknowledge him. And at first, they did. Jay was the first to break under the weight. A man torn between pride and pressure. Jimmy, injured at the time, watched as his brother was emotionally dismantled, manipulated, weaponized. By the time Jimmy returned, the Usos were no longer equals. They were pawns. Roman pulled strings in public. Forced public apologies. Booked their matches by proxy. Stood in the center while they flanked him, not as brothers, but as extensions of his will. And then came the betrayal. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was inevitable. Jimmy superkicked Roman first, not in a match, not in a promo, but in a moment that sent the WWE Universe into shock. Years of silent frustration finally detonated in one move. It wasn't about titles. It was about dignity. The fallout was catastrophic. Roman retaliated with force. Public humiliation. Solo Sikoa, who had once been considered the enforcer of the group, was turned into an executioner. Jimmy was made an example. Roman reminded the world that in his system, blood was sacred, until it wasn't. Then it became disposable. Jay tried to hold the center. Tried to believe there was still a path forward. But Roman's leadership had crossed a line. It wasn't about family anymore. It was about control. About cruelty. And when Jay finally turned, joining his brother in rebellion, it felt less like revenge and more like rescue. For a while, the WWE Universe embraced them as liberated heroes. The Usos had finally broken free. But liberation comes with isolation. Without Roman's machine behind them, they were vulnerable. Directionless. They floated, picking fights, revisiting rivalries, searching for meaning beyond the bloodline that made them. Then came the separation. Jay walked out. Not just on Roman. On everything. In storyline, he quit WWE. In reality, he went dark, no appearances, no explanations. Just absence. Jimmy tried to carry on, but it wasn't the same. Every promo sounded forced. Every match lacked rhythm. Without his brother, Jimmy wasn't half a tag team. He was a man stranded between two legacies, the one he rebelled against, and the one he lost. Fans wondered if it was over. If the greatest brother tag team in WWE history had burned out permanently. And then came the reports. Quiet at first. The Usos spotted together. Not backstage. Not at tapings. At gyms. Private facilities. Hotels close to known Roman Reigns haunts. The timing was too perfect to ignore. Roman was re-emerging. And the Usos? They weren't resisting. They were returning. But this wasn't a reunion built on apology. No handshakes. No hugs. No forgiveness arc. The Usos didn't run back to Roman for redemption. They went back for correction. Because when they looked around the landscape of WWE, when they saw Seth Rollins rise, when they saw Heyman switch, when they saw the crowd cheer louder for others, they realized something painful: they hadn't replaced Roman. They'd just removed themselves from the table. And nobody missed them. Tag team gold went elsewhere. Bloodline merchandise faded. The chaos they helped build had moved on. Jimmy and Jay weren't being courted. They weren't being challenged. They were being forgotten. That's when the blood bond kicked in. Not the superficial kind. The real kind. The kind that remembers shared childhoods. Backyard brawls. Sunday dinners. Legacy not in tweets but in lineage. They didn't go back to Roman out of loyalty. They went back because no matter what happened, no matter who betrayed who, no matter how public the humiliation, he was still blood. And the world had disrespected him. That was the thread that bound them. Roman didn't beg them to return. He didn't offer apologies or make promises. He just gave them a new mission. Let's take back everything. Those 4 words weren't nostalgia. They were marching orders. And for the Usos, that was enough. When they reappeared on Smackdown, they weren't smiling. They weren't pointing fingers. They were flanking Roman like soldiers who had been refitted with armor. Not to guard. To strike. And here's what makes their return more dangerous than ever: this time, they aren't blind. The first Bloodline era was built on submission. This one is built on strategy. They know who Roman is. They know what he's capable of. But now? They're not hostages. They're co-conspirators. And that distinction changes everything. Because if you thought the Usos were deadly when they were conflicted, imagine what they'll do now that they're unified. Their targets are clear. Seth Rollins. For stealing the spotlight. Paul Heyman. For abandoning the family. The entire WWE roster. For letting it happen. The Usos are no longer tagging in and out. They're all in. Full speed. No safety net. And unlike before, they don't need to prove their worth to Roman. They just need to punish his enemies. Paul Heyman doesn't blink unless it benefits him. For decades, he has been the most dangerous non-wrestler in the industry, not because he throws punches or takes bumps, but because he never attaches himself to a sinking ship. His value has always been measured in manipulation, timing, and proximity to power. He was the advocate for Brock Lesnar when no one could touch him. He was the brain behind ECW when the major promotions underestimated a revolution. And for over 3 years, he was the mouthpiece of Roman Reigns, standing beside the tribal chief like a weeping oracle, always whispering, always watching. But in the last year, something changed. When Roman's empire fractured, Heyman didn't stand and fight. He didn't speak against Seth. He didn't rally the Usos. He hedged. He waited. And now, the question isn't just where Paul Heyman stands. It's whether he ever stood with Roman at all. To understand how Paul Heyman became a lightning rod in this war, you have to rewind to the peak of the Bloodline era. He was more than Roman's advocate. He was his voice. His translator. He interpreted dominance into prophecy. Every time Roman stood silent, Heyman gave it words. And every time Roman roared, Heyman turned it into doctrine. But under the surface, Paul was always doing what he does best, surviving. When Jimmy and Jay grew restless, Paul was already reaching out to other talent. When Solo Sikoa emerged, Paul made sure to praise him, often more than the other members of the faction. And when Roman began showing signs of emotional instability, Paul dialed back. Less public confidence. More whispered concern. He knew the empire was cracking. And he wasn't going to go down with it. What makes Paul so compelling is that he plays long games. Years long. He doesn't panic. He doesn't react. He sets pieces in motion before the game even begins. So when Roman vanished, Heyman didn't chase after him. He didn't send tearful messages or cut passionate promos about the tribal chief's return. He pivoted. Subtly. Suddenly. Dangerously. At first, it was minor. Offhand remarks praising Seth Rollins' leadership. Appearances on Raw instead of Smackdown. A few backstage moments where his presence near Seth raised eyebrows, but not alarms. Then came the rumors. That Paul was consulting behind the scenes with Seth's camp. That he was advising on factional cohesion. That he was offering the same guidance he once gave Roman, but this time, without kneeling. And then it wasn't a rumor anymore. Heyman appeared on screen beside Seth Rollins. No grand reveal. No betrayal angle. Just a conversation. An interview. A segment that should have been forgettable, except for one thing. He never mentioned Roman. Not once. The omission was louder than any promo. Because if Paul Heyman is known for one thing, it's reverence. When he believes in someone, he obsesses. He quotes them like scripture. He shouts their virtues. But in that moment, standing next to Seth, smiling, strategizing, he didn't invoke the tribal chief. He acted like Roman Reigns had already become history. That silence? That was betrayal. Roman watched. Of course he did. Paul knows he did. He felt the heat behind the camera. That creeping weight that says, you forgot who gave you power. But Paul didn't flinch. Because he thought Roman was finished. He believed Roman's silence was surrender. That the empire wouldn't rise again. That the Usos were scattered. That Solo was alone. That the seat at the head of the table was permanently vacant. So he made his move. He embedded himself in Seth's camp. At first, Seth welcomed him as an advisor. Then as a confidant. And finally, as a strategist. The fans bought it. They called it brilliant. The ultimate passing of the torch. Roman's mind moving to Seth's body. A fusion of dominance and charisma. But beneath that surface? Paranoia. Because Paul Heyman doesn't form allegiances. He builds leverage. That's what makes him so valuable, and so venomous. He's never truly with anyone. He's always behind them. And the second they start to fall, he's already reaching for the next rope. Which brings us to now. Roman's back. The Usos are back. And Paul? He's exposed. Because this isn't like before. Roman isn't rebuilding a kingdom. He's launching a purge. And Paul isn't protected by nostalgia anymore. He isn't protected by titles or loyalty or blood. He's naked in the storm. And the most dangerous part? He doesn't know which side he's really on. See, Paul isn't stupid. He knows Seth trusts him, for now. But trust in WWE is like gold leaf, shiny, thin, easily torn. One backstage whisper. One wrong glance. One misstep. And it all unravels. And Roman? Roman doesn't forget. He might forgive. Temporarily. Strategically. But never truly. To Roman, Paul's betrayal wasn't emotional. It was structural. He abandoned the architecture of power. That's a sin Roman can't tolerate. So now Paul's stuck between two kings. One he helped build. One he's trying to preserve. Neither trusts him. And he knows it. That's why Paul's body language has changed. Watch closely. His hands fidget more. His words are slower. His eyes dart. He's not acting anymore. He's reacting. Panicking internally. Calculating exits. Because the truth is this, Paul Heyman thought he was the puppet master. But he's the pawn. And he's about to find out what happens when you try to play both sides in a war built on blood, vengeance, and pride. At first glance, Seth Rollins' faction looks like a force. United. Strategic. Ruthless. A fusion of vision, agility, and charisma, wrapped in flashy suits and louder-than-life entrances. They dominate segments. They appear in sync. The crowd sings for them. The matches are sharp. The backstage presence is undeniable. But factions aren't judged by how they start. They're judged by what happens when pressure hits. And now? The cracks are showing. Roman Reigns isn't even back in full yet. He stepped out of the shadows, said a few words, lit a match. And that tiny spark has already started burning holes in the machine Seth built. Because while Roman rules with silence, Seth rules with style. Where Roman demands obedience, Seth cultivates performance. That difference, once seen as strength, is now revealing itself as vulnerability. It started subtly. One of Seth's key allies, let's call him the technician, started going off script in matches. Missing cues. Going for unnecessary spots. In interviews, he hinted at future singles gold. Harmless? Maybe. But in a tightly controlled group like Seth's, it wasn't missed. Then came the missed backup. Seth was in a tag match main event. Roman wasn't there yet. The crowd was on fire. Midway through the match, the opposition brought in steel chairs. Seth's partners hesitated. Didn't jump the barricade. No interference. No protection. Later, the excuses came, production held us back, wrong timing, we didn't know it was that serious. But Seth knew. He watched the footage. Slowed it down. Watched them look at each other. They knew. They just didn't move. And that hesitation? That's not tactical. That's doubt. The next week, Seth was more vocal. Less laughter, more edge in his voice. He started using phrases Roman made famous. We run this business. Acknowledge the mission. That didn't go unnoticed. Behind the scenes, ego swelled. Not everyone in the faction signed up to play backup dancers forever. Seth may be the centerpiece, but the others had ambition, too. When Seth first built the faction, he handpicked superstars who were hungry, but not stars. Now they want more. And Roman's return has accelerated that hunger. Because suddenly, everyone sees where the attention is shifting. Seth doesn't just have to worry about Roman and the Usos. He has to worry about keeping his own people in line. And here's where it gets more dangerous. Paul Heyman. He didn't just embed himself in the faction to advise. He embedded himself to listen. Roman might have been gone, but his eyes were still in the room. And Heyman? He's a master of agitation. Stirring doubts. Quietly nudging one member against the other. Pushing ambition just enough to fracture unity. Seth thought Heyman was a weapon. But Heyman is a virus. And now the infection is spreading. Some of Seth's crew are questioning direction. Why are we going after Roman? Shouldn't we let the past be the past? Why are we starting a war when we already hold gold? Others are asking the opposite. Why haven't we struck yet? If Roman is back, why are we letting him breathe? Seth is stuck between two walls. On one side, hesitation. On the other, escalation. And neither direction offers a clean path forward. That pressure is changing Seth. He's more erratic. His promos are still flashy, but the undertones are darker. Less poetic. More pointed. He's watching his team, not just his opponents. He's holding on to the title tighter. Less celebratory, more defensive. He's becoming paranoid. And he should be. Because factions like his don't die in public. They rot in private. Whispers. Second guessing. Missed signals. Then one night, a teammate doesn't tag in. 1 week, an ally doesn't walk to the ring. 1 month, someone disappears from the graphic on the Titantron. It doesn't take betrayal. It takes distance. Roman understands that. Seth's team doesn't fear Roman. Not yet. They fear Seth's uncertainty. And if that uncertainty spreads? This faction, the group that was supposed to dominate the post-Bloodline era, won't go out in flames. It'll just fade. And in its place? Roman's shadow grows. Continuing with Section 7, the Smackdown return, let's take back everything, written to meet the minimum 2,000-word requirement. This section captures the pacing, tension, and psychological impact of Roman Reigns' surprise return, analyzing the Smackdown segment that flipped the WWE landscape overnight. underscore 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 section 7. The Smackdown return. Let's take back everything. Smackdown was moving like any other show. High energy crowd. Mid-card matches. Standard promos. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. The cameras did their job. The announce team hyped what was next. Fans were comfortable, safe in the rhythm of a typical Friday night. Then the screen flickered. Just once. Not a full glitch. Just enough to catch your eye. The announcers kept talking, but for a split second, the production feed dipped to black. Then it happened again. This time, the lights above the entrance ramp dimmed. Not out of cue, but like something was interfering with the signal. A few fans rose to their feet. Not sure why. Just instinct. Like a cold draft in a room. Then it hit. Not pyro. Not music. Presence. Roman Reigns walked out from the back, not under the usual pageantry of his empire, but through the fog, with silence as his soundtrack. No lights. No graphics. No signature sound drop. Just him. And two shadows behind him. The Usos. They didn't run. They didn't do the old synchronized gestures. They moved like a unit. One mass. One motive. The crowd didn't cheer at first. They paused. That moment, 3 seconds of stunned silence, was louder than any pop. Roman didn't raise his hand. Didn't look around. He walked straight down the ramp, past the commentary table, through the timekeeper's area, toward Gorilla. No confrontation. No match booked. No segment advertised. Just return. Just presence. The camera crew scrambled. Kevin Dunn tried to find an angle. Michael Cole's voice cracked mid-sentence. And somewhere backstage, Seth Rollins watched a monitor, and didn't blink. Roman didn't even look at the camera until he reached the far edge of the production tunnel. That's when he stopped. The Usos flanked him. Like wolves. He looked dead into the lens. No smirk. No bravado. Just calculation. Still. Silent. And he said it. Let's take back everything. Then they disappeared through the curtain. No chaos. No table flips. No brawl. Just a threat. The segment lasted less than 2 minutes. But it was seismic. The crowd didn't know what to chant. Half of them were waiting for a post-return beatdown. The other half were frozen, because they didn't know who the target was. Was it Seth? Was it Paul Heyman? Was it everyone? And that's the genius of it. Roman didn't identify the enemy. He left it open. Because when you don't name your opponent, everyone feels threatened. Backstage, the mood flipped. Sources say several talents asked if Roman was back for good. Some asked producers if plans were changing. A few, mostly Rollins guys, went silent for the rest of the taping. But Roman wasn't looking for reactions. He was delivering a verdict. Not in a ring. In atmosphere. That line, "Let's take back everything," wasn't a catchphrase. It was a war doctrine. A reversal of what Seth had been doing for the last year. Rollins had built storylines. Built matches. Built alliances. Roman came to take. The real message wasn't to Seth. It was to the company. Everything you built in my absence? It's mine now. The Usos didn't speak. Not a word. Their faces said everything. Focused. Empty of all pretense. They weren't there for redemption. They weren't trying to rejoin the tag team elite. They were there to back the king. But more than that, they were there to end careers. Because when you move in silence and say little, every motion becomes scripture. That's what Roman was doing. Returning not with noise, but with control. And here's what makes it more dangerous than any chaotic return: he didn't attack. He restrained. He left the arena without incident. Because this time, Roman wants to own the battlefield, not destroy it. He knows Seth wants a fight. He wants submission. He wants to dismantle Seth mentally before he even throws a punch. And it's working. Backstage that night, Rollins reportedly left early. Quietly. No interviews. No social posts. No freakin' attitude. Because he saw the look. The way Roman didn't blink. The way the Usos didn't fidget. The way they disappeared like ghosts instead of gladiators. This wasn't a pop. This was a promise. Smackdown didn't end that night with a victory or a betrayal. It ended with a shadow cast across the entire WWE roster. What happened in front of the crowd was powerful. What happened behind the curtain was chilling. Roman Reigns didn't come to SmackDown for a pop. He came to send a message. And once that message was delivered, the real work began. Because the return to power doesn't start in the ring. It starts in the shadows. Backstage, as SmackDown's broadcast cut to black, Roman and the Usos walked through the corridor without speaking. No interaction with talent. No high fives. No eye contact with anyone outside their circle. Production crew parted like a tide. Not out of courtesy. Out of fear. You could feel the air change. What viewers didn't see, what didn't air, was the locker room door that shut behind them. Roman, Jimmy, and Jay. No cameras. No script. No seconds. Just blood. No one knows the exact words exchanged in that room. But several insiders have reported fragments. Not lines. Phrases. Short, tribal. Weighted. One stood out. This time, there's no table. There's only the fire. That's not a metaphor. That's code. The bloodline had always been centered around the idea of hierarchy. Roman's phrase, "I'm the head of the table," wasn't just branding, it was infrastructure. Everyone had a seat. Everyone had a role. But that table? It cracked. The new Roman doesn't offer chairs. He offers purpose. And if you don't meet it, you burn. That night, a pact was made. Not the kind you sign with pens. The kind you speak with blood. This wasn't about reforming the bloodline. It wasn't a reunion tour. It was a war pact. Not to defend titles. To take names. Roman told them what the rest of the world didn't understand: WWE moved on too easily. Seth Rollins was crowned too quickly. Paul Heyman was forgiven too silently. Everyone forgot who built the dynasty. The mission was simple. Take everything back. Not politely. Not piece by piece. Forcefully. All at once. No more public acknowledgements. No more showy dominance. No more waiting for WrestleMania season or creative approval. From that night forward, they would move in silence and strike without warning. The Usos agreed. But not with words. They did something older. Something tribal. One insider, who reportedly witnessed this through a small hallway opening, said the three touched fists. Foreheads bowed. Eyes closed. Like a silent prayer turned war chant. They didn't hug. They didn't smile. They committed. The old bloodline was structured. This one is instinctual. Built on raw loyalty and sharpened resentment. And here's what makes this terrifying: there's no official leader anymore. Roman isn't demanding obedience. He's channeling vengeance. Jay is no longer conflicted. He isn't torn between loyalty and freedom. He's aligned, completely. Jimmy has nothing to prove. His betrayal is old history. His return isn't conditional. It's tribal. It's blood. And Roman? Roman doesn't need to be loved. He just needs to be right. The backstage staff that night reportedly stayed clear of the locker room hallway for over 30 minutes. Not because anyone was causing a scene, but because the silence inside that room was too heavy. You don't interrupt a family resetting its law. When they finally emerged, they didn't stick around. They left in separate cars. No press. No statements. But the door to the locker room? It had one phrase scribbled on the whiteboard that hung near it. Something written hastily, probably by one of Roman's people: he decides who eats. That was the closing statement of the night. Not for the fans. For the locker room. A warning. The hierarchy had been re-established. Roman doesn't want to be back. He is back. And if you're not part of the fire, you're in the way of it. Roman Reigns didn't need long. 1 week after his silent return, Smackdown opened with the usual energy: pyro, a hyped crowd, the announce team doing their dance. But under all that noise, something was off. You could feel it in the timing, in the way backstage interviewers kept glancing off camera, as if waiting for a signal no one had rehearsed. Then it happened. The lights didn't cut out. There was no theme song. No countdown. Just chaos. A tag team match between Seth Rollins' associates and a pair of rising stars was underway. It wasn't a main event bout. It was filler. Something to keep the crowd warm before the bigger segments. And then Roman struck. He didn't come through the entrance ramp. He emerged from the crowd, from the side of the hard cam. A blur in all black. No vest. No tactical gear. Just a black hoodie, fists taped, eyes locked. The Usos were 10 feet behind him. Security didn't move. Not because they were intimidated, but because they were out of position. Roman didn't announce himself. There was no cue for staff to prep for an appearance. By the time the truck noticed and cut to a wide shot, the assault had already begun. Roman leveled Seth's partner with a spear so violent the ropes shook. Jey Uso hit the second man with a super kick midair. Jimmy didn't wait, he cleared the announce table before commentary could even react. The crowd didn't cheer. They held. Because they knew this wasn't part of the script. This wasn't a run-in to set up a pay-per-view match. This was something else. Targeted. Calculated. Violent. The camera cut to Seth Rollins backstage watching a monitor. No words. Just his expression, jaw locked, eyes wide, posture tense. He didn't run to the ring. He didn't move. Because he knew what this was. The first shot. Roman didn't grab a mic. He didn't raise a title. He didn't play to the crowd. He walked up to the camera, bent over the broken body of Seth's right-hand man, and whispered, "Next time, it's you." Then he stood. Turned. And left. The Usos followed without a word. No music played. The crowd was split between shock and awe. The segment wasn't built on spectacle, it was built on intention. For the first time since Roman Reigns returned, he didn't make a statement. He delivered one. Backstage, panic followed. Seth's faction was scrambling. One member was laid out. Medical teams were rushing. Cameras were turned off early. Producers were radioing back and forth with live event staff asking if the final segment should be adjusted. Roman hadn't just disrupted a show. He'd shattered protocol. Everything from that point forward was reaction. Later in the night, Roman appeared once more. Briefly. Backstage. Cameras caught him walking past the production truck with the Usos in tow. No words. No drama. Until someone, an interviewer, dared to approach. "Roman, what does this mean for next week? Is this the beginning of..." He didn't let her finish. He looked at her. Calm. Direct. Unblinking. Everything they built while I was gone? I'm burning it. And then he walked out of frame. No catchphrase. No stare down. Just destruction, served cold. That night, Smackdown ended not with a victory or a cliffhanger. It ended with fear. The commentary table sat empty. One of Seth's men was being loaded into an ambulance. And Roman's silhouette was fading into the night. This wasn't about ratings. This wasn't about a title feud. This was reclamation. The audience saw a 3-minute segment. The locker room saw a message. Roman Reigns was back. And he wasn't looking to coexist.